Mr. Kishore Singh is a very well-known name in the field of art. He's a journalist, an art critic, and now a very well-known kind of a curator. He's been looking after all the affairs of the DAG Modern, and this beautiful exhibition, very important, rare exhibition which has come to Chandigarh, it is all due to him. It is his efforts, and he kind of reposed that faith in me that we are able to, but it is how he convinced the gallery people and maybe himself to bring it. I'm really obliged and thankful to him for treating the people of the region with such an important show, which is very thoughtfully curated, which we all know, which represents major movements and according to time and according to artists, according to trends in the Indian modern art movement, which he has single-handedly with his with his team of people. And you must be knowing that in DAG, there are at least 75 persons working only in Delhi, and they have their operations in Bombay and New York as well. So I thank him for bringing this beautiful show and all the programs in between. Yamini ji, you know that she came last time. She delivered such a beautiful lecture on Indian modern art and modern art at the opening of the show. She is here again today. First two sessions will be taken by Yamini Telkar ji, and second session will be taken by Mr. Kishore Singh. Thank you, Kishore ji, for this beautiful exhibition and for these programs.
As you can tell, I'm always excited to talk. I didn't even wait for him to do the formal introduction, and I just started talking. Today, we're going to look at the development of modern art in India, but with a slightly different perspective. Usually, we just start with artworks. We talk about artworks, we talk about artists, we talk about different styles or different genres that have taken place. But I felt, since it would be a smaller group, we could do this journey in a completely different manner. Most of you may be familiar with it, so bear with me. But at the same time, I think the context that we will build and we will take it forward, we will see why you see certain changes or how it developed or evolved over a period of time. And hence I picked up art institutions. There's a reason why I choose the word institution and not just a college of fine art or faculty of fine arts, because the whole concept of institution in India was brought along when the British were here, and they established these various institutions across the country. And they began this as an effort to not create artists or not train people to be painters or sculptors, but essentially to have skilled craftspersons who would create works according to their taste and decorate the buildings, decorate the offices. So you had things like, but it's basically a workshop of metalworking. This is an image from the JJ School of Art, and that it was called as the School of Arts and Craft, or the one in Calcutta was called the Industrial School of Arts and Craft. So the word industry and crafts was integral in the idea or concept of setting up an institution. So the emphasis was more on having a skilled person. The skill was important, the knowledge of the craftsmanship was important. And it was not that difficult to set them up for them to do so, because India already has and had a tradition of metal workers or woodworkers, weavers. So it was all already existent. They just had to formulate it, or they had to kind of bring it on to a module that was suitable for them. For instance, they would make them copy works from European styles, European motifs, and create them, like the whole of VT station was decorated with the help of work that was created in the JJ School of Art, or the Crawford Market, many other buildings, or the carpet weaving workshop. Till date, if you ever are in Bombay and you go to the JJ School of Art, if you see the arts and craft department, there are these huge looms. We used to always ask them, why those huge looms were there. They said they would make carpets over here. And that's what it looked like. And these carpets went into the offices of, the courts, the civil servants, everything. So they were literally like, and they would get them done from students. So it was a very easy setup for them. So they set them up in Bombay. It was set up in Calcutta, Madras, Lahore. These are the 4 main centers which were there. What this essentially does is there was a shift that happened. Earlier, the art centers or the training grounds were where the royal courts were, because that's where you had the patronage. That's where, like for instance, all the miniature paintings, or near a temple, for instance, the Kali Ghat Path. So patronage led to a concentration of artists in a particular area, in a particular region. And even today, when you refer to a miniature, how do you refer it? You say Kangra, you say Guler, you say Jodhpur, or what is that? That is the name of the kingdom. That is the name of the seat of the royalty that patronized it, and hence led to a creation of a large body of works. But what happens is, in the 19th century, the late 19th century and the early 20th century, is that the patronage is cut off. There's a new system that comes into play, which is an art education or a formal system where people had to enroll, and they were trained in doing things that were not, they were traditionally done, but in a different manner. So there's an adaptation of skill. There's an adaptation or a reorientation of how you look at a work of art, or how you look at what you're creating. Also, this is one aspect of it. It couldn't just remain restricted to that, because there's always a desire to find something new. How do you explore it? How do you take it further? This leads to creation of art schools. For instance, in Calcutta, you have the government, which later came to be known as the Government College of Arts and Craft, was formally set up in the year 1854. This has a very interesting trajectory. One is, initially when it started, it was a workshop for the crafts, for the craftsperson and creating works. Also, these were things that were then taken to the grand exhibition which was held in England in the year 1857 and onwards. So works were being created in these particular sections to showcase what is the colony producing, what is the wealth of that particular country. And these were grand showcases, and hence it was even more important that what they created was beautiful and was far better than what was being created in Europe. So it was one way of showing off or bragging, saying that, look, we are ruling over these people, and what we are gaining from them is these fantastic objects, these fantastic things which are not found, only natural resources, but also the skill which exists over there. So it became kind of a platform for showcasing what was being created here. So the Government College of Art began under that principle. So they had, plaster casts. They used to do life studies, nature studies, because apart from creating carpets and metalwork and woodwork, there was a requirement of documenting the country, because see, India was unknown. And at that time, travel to India would take anything from 3 months onwards or upwards of that. So this desire to send back images of what is India, the exotic, the unknown, the fantastical. So again, there was a thing of to train them into creating works that suited their tastes, which was of academic realism, getting in perspective, smaller works, and change in subject matter. Again, these institutes were the training grounds for creating such skilled artists. And that's what the art school did for, even I use the word art school because that's what we're so used to it. Basically what these institutions did at that particular point in time. But there comes a change. In about 1886, there's a new principal that gets appointed to the Government College of Arts and Crafts. His name is E.B. Havel. Now E.B. Havel is somebody who was responsible for bringing about a shift in the way not only Europeans but more so the Indians thought about their own tradition. He was instrumental for inspiring Abanindranath Tagore to say, look at your culture in a different manner. Look at what it means to be an artist in India, or what the art of India is. And There starts the thing of what we call as the Bengal revivalist school. So what did he do? He wrote a book which is called The Origins of Indian Art, and looked at miniature paintings, and he kind of directed everybody to saying that, hey, this is your rich tradition, because at this point in time, which is late mid 19th century, nobody was really giving it enough importance. Nobody was looking at miniatures or art. Everybody was looking at oil paintings, everybody was looking at realistic kind of work. And Abanindranath Tagore, along with E.B. Havel, brought a change in the system, and they did something that was quite daring. They sold off all the plaster casts which exist in their art school. So these huge Roman sculptures and studies of paintings or watercolors or oil paintings, because students were made to copy that. They said, take it all out, throw it away. They sold it, and they replaced it with examples of Indian art, of Indian paintings, Indian literature, and brought in a change. You would have thought that, okay, everybody would be happy, nationalism and looking at Indian. But there's actually a group of people who revolted. They said, how can he do something like that? Because see, there was a dichotomy. At one hand, it was very important to understand your own tradition, your own culture. And at the other hand, there was this need to be universal. There was this need to be at par with the person who was ruling you. And that created a discord. But Havel and Abanindranath Tagore did not, they said, no, this is not what it is, it has to be this way. And the entire art school went into a different mode of painting. So for instance, what you see is what everybody is familiar with is paintings like this, which are in wash technique. These are both paintings by Abanindranath Tagore. The one on your left is that Bharat Mata, which he painted in 1905. Which incidentally was not intended as Bharat Mata, but he painted that when there was the division of Bengal into East Bengal and West Bengal, and there was a revolt, and he painted this image saying that let's not divide, and this was used to kind of unite the people together, which then later on became Bharat Mata. Or the passing away of Shah Jahan, looking at the Taj Mahal. So here there's a deliberate attempt to look at miniature paintings. To look at, when you look at miniature paintings, what exactly are you supposed to look at? You're supposed to look at the line, how the linear quality comes across, how it is two-dimensional yet evocative, how also the technique that was used. It's not bold colors, it's not application, it's not about the force, but it's about the lyricism. It's about the beauty. It's about how you, it's subtle, it's romantic. These were the key things that they kind of looked at. Also the subject matter. They go back to miniature paintings, they go back to subjects which were there from the books, because they believed that this was the way to inspire people. But this did not continue. Of course, there were many followers. Nandalal Bose was one of them, Prasanta Roy, Kitindranath Mazumdar, the list goes on. But there was a change of hands, and there was a new principal who comes in. His name was Mukul Chandra De. And he believed that it is not necessary or it is not important to only look at that. Yes, it is an important part. He brought back again plaster cast. He brought back again study of, live models, nature drawing, still life. So it then became organized, or it formed a new structure. And it is in printmaking again becomes important, because Mukul Chandra De was the first artist who went to the USA to study printmaking, and he is perhaps one of our best printmakers in terms of technical understanding at that particular point in time. He was a principal from 1928 till about 1943, 42. And he was the reason why he, this whole concept of looking at Indian art or what artists should do, not only restricted to the immediate social context, which was at that particular point in time independence, but look at the universal role of the artist, of expression, of understanding what's going on in the world, and not being so focused and not limiting yourself, because not everybody had the same desires. For instance, this is what a classroom, this is a typical classroom in any of the 4 institutes, where you would have a live model seating and artists would be painting around. This is again something that's very typical and very common today, but that was something new, because traditionally artists never did so in India, but it was only with the coming of the art institutions. The next phase that we can move on to is what happens when there's a new institute that's set up by an Indian person. Rabindranath Tagore set up this institute in Shantiniketan. In Shantiniketan, then he set up a department for the study of arts. It was not necessarily art and craft, but it was called as the Kala Bhavan. Why is Kala Bhavan important? It had Nandalal Bose as a teacher. It had, who was, to begin with, he began his career with Abhinendranath Tagore by following his style, his ideology. But there's a shift that takes place in his personal life also, and in the way he paints. He gradually moves away from the whole thing of Bengal revivalism and starts looking at life around him immediately. And he, as a teacher, was instrumental in forming thoughts and ideas for people like Ramkinkar Bej, Binod Bihari Mukherjee, K.G. Subramaniam. And it inspires a whole new thought process, because the institute itself was so liberating. You had Rabindranath Tagore, who was talking about, who was very well traveled. His works were being published in English. He had won the Nobel Prize. He was keen to bring in, or he brought in the Bauhaus exhibition in Calcutta. So the understanding of saying that you can't restrict yourself or you can't limit yourself within the social context was ferment in that particular institute. And that allowed the students over there who were studying there to experiment, to explore, and to break out of their boundaries and not be restricted to it. If like for instance, the building that you see in black and white, that's one of the murals that was done by K.G. Subramaniam. When you have such inspirational things, it is automatic that new ideas take place. And Shantiniketan is responsible for a whole lot of that. Though it still was rooted, this is what a classroom in Shantiniketan looked like. So it's interesting to note that though they're sitting on the floor, they're painting in the Indian style, the ideas are not restricted to it. The idea, they don't force themselves. They never were. Nandalal Bose himself used to always tell his students, it's a recorded statement, I can't remember the statement exactly, but he said that you need to explore, you need to develop your own style, and you need to create, or you need to find your own voice. And what it tells you is that it is not only about a particular way of painting, but how you paint or what you create from it. These are some of the works of the artists from Shantiniketan. That, of course, is Nandalal Bose's Mother and Child. That's Ramkinkar Bej. And the most famous sculpture that you see of Ramkinkar Bej, which is a mill call. I always, whenever I do make a presentation on modern art in India, I may change the other images around, but this particular one I can never ignore, because I feel it's so pivotal and it's so important, for understanding the whole thing of modern art practice in India, or how an artist worked. Because it immediately, think about it. What is it? It's called the mill call. It's a very simple subject. You may think, what's so fascinating about it? It's a group of family. It's a mother, her children, and they're all rushing in one direction. I don't know how many of you might remember, but in Bombay, the times when according to the mill shift change, you have a siren that goes on. It's known as a mill call. It goes off at 10:30, it goes off at 4:30 whenever they have the shift changing. And you literally see hordes of people like moving in one direction towards that mill. And this is what it says. So it's described beautifully as soon as a family hears the mill call, they'll rush around out of their house to the mill, so they reach there on time. Now, why is that important? Because earlier, imagine this, if it was a farmer, does he have a call saying that I have to be at the farm at particular time? He may be there before the sun rises, that's his mill call. But it's not something that's regimented. It's not something that's been forced on him. It's something that comes to him intrinsic, it's something that comes out from within. But this is something that comes to you from the external. It's part and parcel of the modernism that is taking change in your, taking part in your life. And that's what it reflects. the man on the street or the simple people, how the new way of life is changing. That you are now being regimented, or your life is controlled by something that is external, and that you have to go and work at that particular point in time. The second thing that is very important for this sculpture is that this is the medium that he used for it. This is made in cement. Now when you work in cement, you have to be very quick and you cannot go wrong, because there's no scope to come back and rectify your mistake. What you do once is set. Unlike wood, even in wood you can't do it, but at least you have time. You can think, you can plan. But in cement, it dries so quickly, or concrete, or you just have to know exactly what you're doing, what you want to do, how you want to do. I think that's where I keep coming back to this sculpture, and I believe that Ramkinkar Baid is somebody who's so important to understanding the whole concept of modernism in India, because one of the mediums that he handled, second is the way he broke it down, and he really reached out to understanding or capturing the ethos that was there in India at that particular point in time. And that also happened because he lived as a student, and he continued to be in Shantiniketan, and that was where a large chunk of his life was, and that's why an institute played an important role in shaping the man and his art. That's him. I would now kind of step back and bring in the slide that most of the times I begin my lecture with, which is this, which is Raja Ravi Verma. And again, he's an important artist. And why is he important? Because he reflects another aspect of modernism. This is not part of an institute, but it is, the man is an institution himself, because he was the first one to make the medium of oil cane popular. He was the first one to kind of do portraits in such great understanding of the subject matter, the popularity that he enjoyed. That becomes an important marker of saying that again a shift from what was going on, breaking away and doing something that was new. In direct contrast, you have Amrita Shergill. These are like your two parts of the spectrum, where she didn't study in India, but she is part of the institution. She studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and then how she came back to India and brought in ideas with her. So mind you, while you have all the institutions in Shantiniketan, in Calcutta, they were aware of these practices or these players in the field, and they were kind of responding to that also. So when E.B. Havel says that no, this, you need to look back into your tradition, he's in a way kind of alluding to Raja Ravi Verma and Amrita Shergill's practice of looking at the West and making, they were kind of the stars at that point, and re-looking back into your culture and answering those things. And hence I bring them here, because you can't have a lecture on modernism, or you can't talk about modernism without not talking about these two people. Next, I talk about the Government College of Arts and Crafts, which is in Madras. Again, the same origins, same setup, or the same framework for setting up the space. And this is in Madras. What happens over here? The person that you see in the center is a force to reckon with, which is D.P. Roy Chaudhary. And he was the one who was single-handedly responsible for kind of formulating and guiding the students who were there. D.P. Roy Chaudhary had also studied at Shantiniketan. See, the connections keep going back and forth between the institutions. They're not isolated, they're always connected. And he brings in those ideas over here, and he again inspires students to paint in a very different manner. Or on the far right, what you see over here is K.C.S. Panikar, who's an important figure, where he manages to again bridge the gap between like what happened in Shantiniketan, where you look at the modernism, but yet you are aware of your own culture. K.C.S. Panikar also is managing to, or he managed to kind of, bring those things together. This is an artist called, this is a work by Redappa Naidu. Now, over here you see a completely different dialogue, or a completely different visual vocabulary that takes place. Because the influences which were there, the cultural ethos which was around in Madras was completely different, where you have the overpowering presence of temples, dance and music. That kind of comes into the artist's vocabulary, and where they are trying to negotiate the space, see, between nationalism and modern universal practice as an artist. I repeatedly keep saying these things because you have to understand that the early part of the 20th century, or even today, the way the artist answer is different, but that was a key concern. If you're an artist and you're painting, what is it that you're painting and why is it that you're painting? Do you continue to look at your tradition and reinterpret the tradition, or do you look at what is happening in the world and see how it is that you're living? For instance, Ramkinkar Baij's Milk Hall, which was about new way of living. The way people are dressing is changing, the way you're traveling is changing, cities are undergoing a change. How is it that an artist negotiates that changes that are taking place around him? How is it that an artist responds, or what he feels inside, how does he translate it into his works? And that's why constantly in whatever I may speak about, it comes back to these two questions. And the artists who are working in say from the 1920s up to the 1960s, that is always a key concern, and that's where Redappa Naidu also fits in. For instance, if you look at this, you'll see, yes, it's a deity, but it's a shift away, that he doesn't make the deity like a Chola sculpture or like a typical stone sculpture. He's kind of picked up elements that he thinks are pertinent and important to be spoken about, and he kind of is negotiating his own territory over here, where making it simple, where using the principles of line but not making it like an actual life study, but just taking it in the essence of it, or what is the expression that he wants to capture while he is painting this work which is called as Deity. Or the next work, which is by K.C.S. Panikar, where he turns to calligraphy, because he says, what kind of resonated with him was that we have such a vast tradition of shlokas, of mantras, of the Vedas, of various books. How is it that the spoken word, or our culture, which is embedded in the word form, how do I bring that into my works? Because it is a kind of a negotiation. Even when we stand in front of a painting, we're constantly thinking, what does it mean? What is the idea? And we love to ask the question, can you please explain the work to me? I don't understand the painting. Because you're always negotiating a work of art in terms of words. Because that's what something that comes to us very naturally, without even thinking about it. That's how we're looking at the work. When we talk about it also, we use words. So words become a very important part of it. And that's what K.C.S. Panikar also picked up. He's saying that there is so much of words that we have, especially coming where he was studying. You have the whole Tamil Sangam literature which was there. You had chants that were being said, music which was there. And he becomes, and mind you, these are not legible scripts. You can't read them, and he didn't intend it to be read. So it's kind of a pun. He's using things that look like, forms that look like words. He forces you, and you're desperately trying to make out what script it is. But it is not a script. It is not a language that is meant to be read. It is a language that is meant to be enjoyed, to be absorbed, and to be felt. And I think it was very clever of him, or it was a very interesting way that he picks it up and he does it, because that's what even Redappa Naidu is doing, but in a very different manner, and K.C.S. Panikar is doing it in a very different manner. The third person that I look at is K. Ramanujam. He had a very short lifespan, and unfortunately he passed away when he was just 27 or 28. But the drawings that he's done within that period, if you stand in front of them, they're mesmerizing. They're black. Most of what I have seen are black and white. I'm sure he's done a few color works also. And there is intense, intensely worked on forms where you say, oh, maybe that's a Shiva, maybe that's, the Shesha Shahinag. But again, he kind of demystify, he takes away the traditionally known meaning of that particular form and he renegotiates it in the way he understands it. So he's kind of taking your comfort factor away and yet giving you some comfort by saying maybe it's that, and then you start looking at that. So that's what was happening in Madras, and that's a very interesting thing that comes from that particular institute. I mean, there's more that I can show, but it's very difficult to just restrict and cull it down to very few, and hence I've just picked up on the most iconic examples. There are many others who worked, because from this it leads on to the formation of Chola Mandal, which is the artist-run initiative or the artist village, which again KCS Panikar formed with it was a group of another 15 artists together. Their idea was, why don't we all come together, because there was lack of patronage. There was no space where they could operate as artists, because most of them had to take up jobs either as teachers or work in magazines or somewhere else. But to make a living as an artist was very difficult. So they had formulated this village. It's literally a big village in just a little away from Madras, called the Chola Mandal, where they all worked together. They used to sell their works. They would create different objects, sustain themselves, and continue to paint. But I'm not going to go into details of that. The next institute that we look at is the JG School of Art in Bombay. What you see on the far left, I think by now it's become quite boring, but you see the teachers, and can you imagine if you had teachers who were dressed so properly coming in and teaching you art, and, in a suit and wearing a very formal dress? That's what it was, because they had to be dressed in that particular way, and especially when Indians started teaching. See, because earlier it was always a Britisher who would come and teach. It was only gradually that Indians were given the post of being a teacher, and it was a very lofty or very important position. And they always had to be like, measuring themselves up with their peers who were, artists or trained teachers from London or from any part of Europe. And you had teachers like that and students like this, who revolted, and how. Of course, it starts with Gaitonde, the other two are unknown. And I mean, I know the last one here because he was a very well recognized and an authority in JG School of Art. He was a librarian, and it was believed that he could tell you which artist had which exhibition and what paintings were there and in which book what is mentioned. He was like a legend and an icon, and everybody kind of said, "Oh, VND sir ke paas jao, sab mil jayega tumko, library mein study karne ki zarurat nahi hai." That was his legend, because he lived with these guys and he created works. And though JJ School of Art had its origins again in the same thing of a workshop or an industrial training ground, it created a whole lot of artists who were very rebellious, who were always questioning. Because again, you have to notice the location. It was in a city like Mumbai, which was, always the commercial capital, and life was at fast pace at whatever time it was, whichever century that it was faster than definitely Madras and Calcutta put together. So it created a different work environment, or an environment that was more conducive to questioning in a much more stronger manner, rather than kind of contemplating. And then you have another teacher. This is work of Shankar Palsikar. Again, his works are not as easily seen, but he was the one who kind of Gaitonde or Prabhakar Kolte or a whole lot of artists always used to look up to him, because he was the one who, how should I say, to put it very simply, inspired them to look at the non-figural form, to look at abstract painting or what abstraction means. And that's why you have so many artists from the JG School of Art who turned to abstraction, who moved towards abstraction. He was one man who was responsible to a very large extent. This is one of his early works, and then he gradually moves on, and he inspired them to think, and he inspired them to explore different directions. Or you have K.K. Heber from JG School of Art again, where he negotiated traditional within the modern form. Of course, Souza. Hussain, Raza. I'm not stopping and talking about these words because I think all of us are quite familiar. If you do want me to stop, you can take it as a question later on. Then you have the Faculty of Fine Arts, which was quite late in the day when it was set up. It was in 1950, and it had N.S. Bendre as its one of the earliest teachers and the founding person there. Then there was K.G. Subramaniam, who was instrumental in inspiring thought, in wanting the students to explore different directions. And interestingly, both these teachers, Bendre was from J.G. School of Art and K.G. Subramaniam from Shantiniketan, they created such a beautiful environment. You had K.G. Subramaniam, who would be talking about the traditional, talking about how terracotta is important, how butt paintings are important, how you should look at life around you. And you had Bendre, who was such a formal teacher, who was talking about color, talking about brushstrokes. I think what it created was something that was very different from what was happening in any of the other arts institutions. Also, what you have to understand is, like, while you had Calcutta, Madras and Bombay set up in the earlier part of the century, almost like 100 years ago, with a different precedent, Baroda was set up in 1950, post-independence, and it was set up by the royal family in Baroda. The very nature of the institute, the very ideology that was there with the institute is very different. It comes at a time when there is a new nation. It comes at a time when they want to explore the new nationhood, which is just being, kind of accessible to all, and the desire to create a language that express this new nation. So obviously that they're not going to look back at what happened, with the institutes in Lahore or in Madras. They wanted to break free and create something that was new. They had the desire within them to say that here is an opportunity for us to make a name for ourselves. They come with a long lineage, but we will have something that's so new and so strong and powerful to convey. And hence, there is this need to be not like Shantiniketan, not like JJ, not like that, then what? And I don't think they had that motto or a vision statement as that, but I think it comes in through the professors who were there. It comes in through the desire with which the institute was set up. And you have students who are the students from Baroda. You have Lakshma Gaud. You have Jairam Patel, Jyoti Bhatt. You have Himmat Shah, Raghav Kaneria, all these Jyotsna Bhatt, all these people at that time who were creating fascinating works, which was a completely new dialogue. You have Jairam Patel's work over here. I think we have a Jyoti Bhatt here somewhere. So the whole vocabulary that comes in there is completely different. It's a fresh institute. It's an institute that's young, dynamic, and free India, wanting to do things differently. So you have Ghulam Ahmad Sheikh. And again, at this point in time, he did turn back to miniatures. But look at the way he interpreted them. But what a contrast in the way the person, of course it's the individuality of the artist that mind, but it is also the atmosphere where it comes from, the ferment which comes from the space where you have been discussions and endless cups of tea, coffee or whatever to come up with these ideas. So the same point of inspiration, a similar desire, but a completely different interpretation, a completely different way of engaging with the form. Again over here, what will I say? This is a quality, linear. The line is the strongest over here. The flatness of the picture and the use of color. But here it is not romanticized. Here it is contextualized to the current times. What are the cities that we live in? What is the kind of life that we have? Of course, this work, particular work, doesn't say all of these things, but works from that period when he worked in this particular form, said all of these things. So, an inspiration or an ideology may be the same, but it is the context within which you're working, the times within which you're living, the influences which are there, makes all the difference in how it is expressed and how it was painted. That's an early Jyoti Bhatt. That's a K.G. Subramaniam. This is just a brief overview, and you can't really read correctly, but the various centers which then become important or are important till date, where you have art institutions, art colleges, where people are working and creating across India. I think we're doing good on time. Do you want to have question answers if you have any questions? If you want to know a little bit more on any of the artists, because there are some that I've skipped. There are many that I haven't taken into account, given its presentation. In terms of modernism, you have Sohan Kadri. I mean, he's an important person who worked within the realm, or he always talks about, you know, his childhood or his upbringing in Punjab. You also have artists. Who else? The other person that comes to my mind immediately is Ranbir Kaleka, who Krishan Khanna. Sometimes, you know, an artist becomes very difficult to say that it is to do with the land, because in a way, yes, for the early part of his career, he did talk about partition and how that affected him. But when I talk about Sohan Kadri, his engagement is far more rooted within the ethos and the culture, where he talks about the farmland or his exposure towards, how should I say, towards the, you know, the philosophies which were there. With Krishan Khanna, what happens is that he becomes more of the universal, and where he comes from is not so much there. You know, he just after a particular point in time, he just moves on to a very different series. It's more about the city life. If you see the Bandwala series that he did, or, you know, the Christ series that he does. So he kind of moves away from it gradually. But with Kadri, I think it's a constant engagement that you see in his works.
Where do you place Paramjit?
I mean, see, then this question of, how should I say?
And Baba.
Baba, I would still kind of connect back to this whole Punjabiyat, for a lack of a better word. Because what happens is that with Paramjit Singh, it is not so much, you know, if you look at his works otherwise, they could be in a very different context. He began his works with still lifes and landscapes, and with a very political statement of India in the 60s. And then he moves on, and then what you later on see is the landscapes, which are so spiritual, or for lack of, they're more abstractions and they're more internal dialogues. But with Baba, I could say that there is I don't know, how should I say, a connect that you see in the way he paints, in the way he refers to it. See, that is, I think, that's what I'm looking for. What happens is that visually, it's very difficult to put an artist down as from a particular land, until and unless they are conscious of the fact, and they speak about it, and they connect it, and they know that when they work, they're working in that particular ideology. For instance, if I were to talk about, you know, can I put down Hussain as a Maharashtrian artist? Can't, but he was born in Pandharpur, which is like the heartland of Maharashtra, where you have so much of the Vitthal worship and everything that comes in, but you can't pin him down to that. Or would you put Rabindranath Tagore as only a Bengali artist? I mean, you can't, because his works were so different. Do you think he painted anything like the Bengal revivalist school like Abhinendranath Tagore? No, he didn't. Did he paint like Ramkinkar, where was his thing about the city or Shantiniketan? He didn't, though he was the one who founded Shantiniketan. But his works were based on a completely different plane. So sometimes artists don't necessarily, reflect the particular cultural ethos. They just move beyond that. And that's what the whole thing about, that's the bottom line of this lecture also. That every time I try to use a different anchor, when it's the institutions, you try to see that and I've picked up very, very smartly things that really reflect for that particular institute. But there are many artists who don't fit into that also. But then I have to I have to create a direction, I have to create a storyline. Otherwise my lecture will be all over and I'll only talk of one institute. So, having said that there are always people who will fit into that mold, who answer to that particular culture, to that particular ethos, to that particular time period. And then there will be some who do not belong to anything, who do not necessarily reflect that particular ideology. They move beyond it, and sometimes that journey is very quick and sometimes it takes a number of years to do that. So, in that sense, to answer your question, where would I put, or where does Punjab fit? I think it fits everywhere, like the whole nation. Then you have this other larger question. Why is it that we should only, why should we look at art as from India? Or should it be based on the merit of the artist? Then how does that work? So that's a larger question, and it's something that doesn't have a straight, clear-cut answer.
You have like other Punjabi artists, and this Dhawan, so you can't pin them down to a.
I mean, where you have many people in India won't even know Rajendra Dhawan and what he did.
Gujarat, Satish Gujarat.
Yeah. I mean, with names, yeah.
You seem to be ascribing a value to, a more progressive value to the universalists, rather than the, sort of, for a better word, provincialists. But yet, everything that a universalist does, as in writing, has to come from the language, in this case, the language of art.
Yes.
Somewhere that must be rooted in the particular culture or the cultural ethos of that person. Which is why we are also sort of able to differentiate between the Bengal school and the Bombay school and Lahore, Madras, whatever. So we can't really say that Gujarat, for instance, or for instance, they don't have anything to do with their particular culture. They must have come from that. I mean, their language, initial language must have come.
Yeah.
So, sorry, to cut a long story short, come to the question. Are you saying that universalism is better than being rooted in the language? Because in writing it is moved from that. In writing it's sort of, people are looking at what is rooted more in that cultural ethos as sort of speaking a more universal language perhaps.
Yeah, so the whole idea of universal is out, whether it's in literature or even in art. Because what is the universal and how do you, there isn't a thing like universal. Universality was something that was in the 19th century, at the most of the first 2 decades of the 20th century, then it's gone. Nobody believes in it. The reason why I talk about this through the lens of the Institute is that what happens is that when we talk about the whole evolution of art practice in India, modern art practice particularly in India, it starts with Raja Ravi Verma, Amrita Shergill, and it kind of does that whole trajectory of movement which happens between one to the other, to the other, to the other. But at the same time, what it is important to know or to take into account is that there was also the role of the institution which defined the way people perceived art, and hence I spent a large amount of time on the Government College of Arts and Craft in Calcutta, Why? Because that was one of the places where there was a lot of ferment that was taking place. If you see it, it started off by being completely in the European model of teaching, went to the Indian model of teaching, and then somewhere along with Mukul Chandra Day, it found out a middle path and where it kind of balanced out the whole thing. Obviously, when you have these marked shifts that are taking place, that institute plays a role. And that is what I was trying to say. It is not to do with the universal. The universal just, there isn't, I believe there isn't anything like a universal thing. It has to be, and also an art institute, that's why I said that I've picked up the most typical examples of that particular institute. It's not to say that JJ School of Art did not have anybody who painted in the Bengal style, or somebody in Madras was not painting in a different style. There were lots of voices which existed. But to create a storyline, to put forward a perspective that how important is an art institution in the creating of a particular language and understanding it, where is that language rooted, was the whole idea. It was not to say that, yeah. In fact, that's what I was trying to say throughout, that in Calcutta, because of these two institutes, this is what you had. In Baroda, post-independence, this is what you had. In JJ, which was a commercial capital, you have a different kind of things, whereas in Madras, is the same institute model. If you look at it, it's the same model that was there to train craftsperson, whether it was in Calcutta, Madras, Bombay or Lahore. But each of those places, depending on the social, the cultural and the intellectual background or political background, created a different response to it. What happened, otherwise the same thing should have happened in Madras also, but it didn't. In fact, E.B. Havel, before he came to Calcutta, was in Madras. He spent 10 years as a superintendent over there. But there he didn't create this whole thing. He was obviously to write a book like The Origins of Indian Art. It couldn't have happened in 1 year. It has to have had a long period of ferment. But that moment for him to change the system, to sell the plaster cast, it didn't happen in Madras. Whereas Madras was more strongly rooted in culture. In the culture that was typically to do with Sanskrit literature, Tamil literature, temples. It was more evident, more obvious, whereas Calcutta was far more anglicized. It was the capital for the British, but it is there where he took the call of saying that no, we have to look back at our culture. So it is a space, it is that the local which is affecting this one language of modern, which we try to kind of sanitize and say it's like one trajectory.
So does it mean that somehow, like India as a big, conglomerate kind of a thing, that we have a typical, kind of a mixed kind of a cultural background to our, art language? Have we been able to evolve? Various traditions, various cultures coming together, find out similarities, and is it coming back to the universe? Is it like when we take an exhibition of Indian art to say Europe, and do those people look at it from a different point of view? It's come from India, are they able to make out, or does it show that?
It's an interesting question that you ask, because the moment you say that how is India perceived outside, they want to see something which is like possibly stuck with Thomas, Kettle and Tilly and the Daniel brothers, because that's what India they want to see. The moment you show them anybody which is like a Souza or a Hussain or a Tayyab Mehta, oh, this one reminds me of Bacon, that one reminds me of this one, that one reminds, they immediately start to draw parallels. They want to see India which is typical. They're not willing to accept that modernism happened in India at a different particular point in time and people responded to it. They say, oh, but why should we look at this? Give them a miniature, they're very happy. But the whole thing, I think the point that you're trying to make is that is there a single monolithic structure, if I got your question right, of the whole, there isn't, and there it shouldn't be, and that's what the whole
What I
idea.
meant was when there is Europe, and when artist comes from say Scandinavia, an artist comes from Spain, and an artist comes from UK, which is an island, and there they do not find that kind of a form an opinion about that art that it comes from a particular region. When it comes from say Africa or India, then they look at it from differently. My whole idea was, have we been able to evolve a language which is typical of us?
Have we been able to evolve a language? No, because there can't be, because like you said itself, that our whole nation is so varied and it's so distinct in each region that you can't have one voice.
Well, my question was maybe slightly, I'm not able to put it rightly. It is like intellectually, what I believe, the West thought it is their domain. That India or countries, third world countries, they are at a much lower level. So in terms of ideas, in terms of like developments scientifically otherwise, so they are putting us say 200 years or 300 years behind. At our civilization, they want to look at that kind of art. So anything which has got to do with contemporary ideas, and they think that we are probably either copying them, their artists, or they want to look at, as you said, miniature or something like that. So have we been over the life, like we have these artists who have been to Paris and elsewhere, they have, of course they have influences and inspirations, but now after say about 70, 80 years, is there anything which say it expresses us?
It is happening very slowly. One, I think it has to start with the whole thing of the way it is spoken about. Unfortunately, when you talk about art history, it is always that the West is the center, particularly Europe, and now the US is the center, and then everything else is the other. It is only when you start, the history is rewritten completely, or when you talk about modernism, you look at modernisms that happen in various parts of the world, will it start to make a difference? That process has started very slowly, where now books have started to include, to an extent, South American art, and they're looking at Yfredo Lam, and they're looking at the other artists to be included in the whole process of writing history or rewriting history, where it is all inclusive. That is a very long time in taking, and I think that parity will come when it comes. In terms of acceptance, yes, in the past 5 years we've had shows of, we've had a retrospective of Gaitondi, like the MoMA made a conscious decision of including Asia. They're gracious enough, it's condescending, but that's what it is, that they're now looking at Asia also. So they started with the Chinese artists, then they got Gaitondi in. Then you have Nasreen Mohammadi's retrospective that is taking place in museums. So it's a slow. Bhupen Khakkar at Tate Modern, I mean, including Sousa, and then we feel, oh, Sousa isn't Tate Modern or Bhupen Khakkar. See, we also have to overcome that awe of saying that, oh, they're there, that means there's something better. We also look to the West to validate what we have. So it's a two-way process where both sides have to kind of acknowledge and accept that there exists a language which reflects what is there or what is current in that particular country. And then it moves on to a different, I mean, I have no answer for your question. I only have assumptions and what it can be.
We can come to that later.
Yeah.
Madam, different routes are created by artists. Does not come to form. Some processes created by several different artists. Does not belong to form.
He's talking about the nudity part. Does it amount to pornography?
Yes.
Well, it depends on, does nudity amount to pornography? No, it doesn't, because there is a very fine line between what is considered as pornography and what is concerned as just looking at creating a work of art because it fits in a certain ideology. It differs from culture to culture. It differs from time period to time period, and so what may be acceptable in let's say in a country like not in the United States of America may not be acceptable in India, but what may be acceptable here may not be acceptable in Bangladesh. So there isn't a 100% defined answer as to what would constitute as a pornography, because it's a very subjective opinion.
It can be given on Facebook.
I think that's a separate forum, not something that we can discuss here. Yeah.
So I think since you talked about art institutions, when did women students, girl students start getting enrolled in these?
They always have been, so women have always been part of the institution. If you see, this one is a lady here. There's another one, in fact I should have included that slide. There's another one which is very interesting, shot by Homi Vayarwala, where there are these two girls who are making a sculpture of a man at JG School of Art. Shanti Niketan always had women students within their faculty. So they've always been a part of it. Now the second question, more important, is when were they documented or spoken about? That is a slow process, and they haven't been actually looked at in that great detail for various reasons. One of them is that women themselves at that particular point in time felt that they weren't that important. Those who did feel that were important made it a point to be there. Like for instance, Amrita Shergill. She was very confident and knew that she had to be there, so she came up. But a lot of them were kind of patronized. That's the only word that I can use, and said, "Oh, you're my muse. You are my, you helped me, or you supported me." This is something that you hear even today, and it is not something that, and it's not only typical for India, but it's everywhere in the world. And now you're getting to hear about women impressionist artists. Sometimes it's very irritating, saying that, when you found Vermeer, you did not say man from the post-Baroque period found new man artist. You just say new artist from the post-Baroque period found, not just say new artist from the Impressionist discovered. Leave it at that. But that's a separate, again, a very long discussion, which is rooted in the whole thing of feminism. But it is an important question. So they were always there. They were always creating, works along with everybody else.
But I found it interesting since you mentioned so many men artists, since the women artists,
Yeah.
since the students were always there,
Yeah.
then I think that also becomes significant that though they were always there, they were somehow not brought to attention.
Not brought to attention. So today evening, if you come, you will see Madhavi Parekh and Manu Parekh, and that will be an interesting conversation again to see how that works. It is something that needs to be looked at, and there are a lot of younger, scholars, especially in JNU and in Baroda, who are looking at that, who are questioning that. When they look at the works, they say in the 90s, it's always the body of the man, or the man looking at the woman's body, but not a woman looking at a man's body. So these are interesting conversations. I think it's from a generation that is after me, who will come and talk about it, and then you won't have to ask a question like that, what about the women? It will come to them naturally. For me, I still belong to that generation where it just never even occurred.
We now have Anita Dubey as the curator of the Kochi Biennale.
Yeah, but then that's okay, For the 2 times you had Sudarshan and Jitish, now you have Anita. It should be like that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's coming of age.
Yeah. So thank you very much for sitting patiently and listening to me. And I think we have one more session after Kishore. Yeah.
Yamini ji is art historian in the sense she's been heading the saffron art before joining into the DAG Modern. DAG Modern, many of you who do not know, is Delhi Art Gallery. Mr. Kishore Singh, who is heading the publication department and also the curatorial part of the Delhi Art Gallery. And this exhibition, was supposed to come to an end on the 7th because, there are a whole lot of logistics involved when we are organizing something like that, like, insurance and travel and permissions. But they very happily agreed to extend the dates and took care of all the logistics. Now this exhibition is coming to an end tomorrow. Every good thing has to come to an end. Once they are so happy with the people of Chandigarh, and today also we are happy that at the end of the day we have some respectable number of people to attend to this part of the appreciation course. But initially, like, there have been hordes of people, a lot of people visiting, like from all over Punjab, people coming in bus loads, students, teachers, art lovers from Jalandhar, from Amritsar, from Chandigarh University and various parts and schools. And in fact, this gallery probably has never seen as many people visiting this kind of an exhibition ever before in the history of Chandigarh or maybe in the region. So we are quite thankful to the people who took interest, but more thankful to Kishore ji, who actually reposed his faith in the city and us in the Punjab Lalit Kala Academy. And we have responded, I think, well. Maybe more praise from your words, not my words. Thank you.
As part of the workshops that we're doing today, we were looking at this overall understanding of the art movements in the country, how collectors were formed, how artists changed, what the catalytic moments were in their process and practices. And the other two modules that we're looking at sharing with you in the morning half is one on careers in art and the other on actual mediums and materials, how you recognize what goes into the making of a work of art. When you look at a work of art, how do you understand what it is, etc., which of course YAMINI will come back to after this. I'm going to begin by just asking you one question. The world of art we know is kind of amorphous. We don't really understand it. It's something people do, all this arty-sharty culture vulture wale log. Just to try and get from you, how many careers or how many job opportunities would you imagine the world of art throws up? Yeah, not many, but let's call, there's an artist, there's a painter, there's a sculptor, there's someone who sells that work, maybe someone who writes about it. Any others that we can think of?
The whole world of
Curators.
Absolutely.
They write about it, they research. I think what she talked about was research.
Absolutely. A huge amount of it, yeah. So, what I'm going to do is actually run you through the sheer universe of opportunities that exists in the world of art that we don't normally think about because we kind of isolate this world. We put it aside. We don't really just say it's something that some people do. It's all right to go and look at art sometimes or go to a museum sometimes, etc. But there are literally millions and millions of people employed directly or indirectly and through process of learning, education, career opportunities that are being that they're being trained for or sometimes are training themselves for on the job. Just to run you through, the most simplistic is our knowledge of the world of art coming through galleries itself. What do galleries do? Galleries sell paintings, they sell sculpture, they represent artists. And there are two kinds of galleries. Galleries that work in the space where there are artists who are living, whose works are brought in on a commission. Exhibitions such as this one are curated and held. Works are sold. When the exhibition comes to an end, the works go back to the artist. The other space, and the kind of space that we in DAG operate in, is the secondary market space. The space where works have been acquired, pretty much like an auction house, through secondary sales, either from the artists, etc., or from studios, or from friends, or from auction houses, etc. A collection is built up, and that's how the curating and exhibitions are put together and held. Diwan was telling you that there are about 75 people working at DAG. Typically, a gallery will have a small one, 3, 4, 5 people, a very large one, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. And this is pretty much the model around the world. DAG's current staff strength is about 130 people, and I will correct you, about 100 of those are currently in Delhi. We're in the process of growing much more, but then of course, that is something that happens because we operate in the secondary space, which allows us far more room to research, to archive, and to work more like an institution itself. So just some of the kind of activities that DAG does, its galleries, the kind of exhibitions it opens, the kind of art fairs it participates in, and the look and feel of how our exhibitions are put together. The reason why so many people are required is very obvious when you see even this exhibition here in Chandigarh. There's an entire team of people that has worked on it. There's a book on the actual India Modern exhibition that was put together. Researchers worked on it, photographers worked on it, curators put the whole, chose the works and selected them for the exhibition. There was somebody who's written each and every label. And I think sometimes, some of you are from the media, writing those labels, and we have a specification of writing in 85 words, for example. Putting your thoughts down on an artist and a work of art in 85 words is more difficult than writing 500 words, because you're actually summarizing an entire body of work, an artist's work, and that specific work, and leaving those thoughts with you as clues to take away from that painting on how to read the artist, how to read the work of art itself. So there's all those people who work as well as part of the team. What do galleries typically need? Someone to head the gallery, someone to coordinate with artists, writers, promoters, media people, all the kind of growing universe that you will see around a gallery, a sales team, because obviously you need to sell works, people in marketing to do promotional work, research, acquisitions. You have to acquire works, or you have to be in touch with artists, etc., and work with them. So even if you may not be acquiring, as in the case of a secondary gallery, you're negotiating with artists to bring them in so that they choose your gallery over other galleries. And of course, logistics, but then of course I have an entire section separately on logistics. Selling of art. Itself, a huge, huge world. How many of us actually walk into a gallery and say, oh, I like that very much, I'm going to buy it. What's the price? 18 lakhs, all right. Do I get a discount? 16 lakhs, I'm going to take it home. That would be a dream for all of us who work in art institutions. Doesn't happen like that. There's a lot of effort that goes into selling. People who are putting in that kind of money want to know that their money is being spent well. There's a whole range of other things that you can buy. You can buy diamonds, you can buy jewelry, you can buy property, you can buy clothes, you can go on a holiday. Some things will return values, others won't return values, etc. But these are all experiential things. Art is part of that experiential universe. But the reasons why you buy art are the reasons that the sales team puts across to you. So for them, it's very important to know about the artist. It's very important for them to know about the work of art they're selling. They have to understand, if I am to communicate to you why an artist is important or why that particular work is important, I must be very confident about it myself, which means I need to be curious, I need to study. I need to understand values, figures. I should be able to communicate with an artist. I should be able to tell an artist that a work by Sousa sold for X amount in these 2 or 3 or 4 auctions. This is a comparable work. Therefore, the value is set at such and such price. So there's a lot of study that goes into selling a work of art. So this is just an example of the way, for example, DAG operates. At the India Art Fair, where we were showing a work by Amrita Shergill, we actually created a separate room so people who could line up to see the work and a lot of descriptions on the work of art were written on walls in the room. There was a timeline on the artist that was provided, etc. There was a film made on the work of art specifically, which had been where we had Vivan Sundaram, her nephew, talk about both Amrita Shergill and the work of art, etc. All extremely time-consuming, take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and a lot of money. So you're creating value when you're selling works of art. Other than the galleries themselves and the sales staff that they employ, there are art dealers, people who are kind of middlemen and operate in a gray area in a space because they're not aligned to a specific institution, but they know artists, they know galleries, etc. So they become the middlemen, very often just like brokers when we are buying properties. They are different in turn from advisors. Because advisors are the trained people for whom knowledge of that property is essential. For the dealer, it's just broking a deal. So the kind of atmosphere that you require, the kind of knowledge, the kind of interaction, etc. There is definitely a sense when you walk into a gallery of being very privileged. And I think that is what sales teams extend to their clients. They make them feel very special. Viewing rooms are created. They are treated well. They're spoken well. Follow-ups happen. There's a sense of discretion. People do not always want other people to know that they're buying something at a certain value, at a certain price, etc. So discretion becomes an extremely important part of someone from a selling team. Careers in auction houses. Auction houses operate in the secondary space as well. Auction houses, as we know, deal with works that have already belonged to other people who are now putting them up for sale because they've got tired of looking at a work of art, or they want to reclaim a certain value, or they want to sell that and buy something else for themselves, or any of a myriad reasons somewhere. We've all heard of Sotheby's and Christie's, two of the oldest auction houses in the world, with a history over 250 years old. There's Bonhams, there's Phillips, there's lots of other cities, countries in the West have literally hundreds of auction houses. The largest of the auction houses, strangely enough, operates out of China. India has a much smaller and a shorter history in terms of auction house practices. We have Saffron Art and a sister concern, Story Limited, that operate both in the online and the offline, the live space. You have Astaguru, you have Pandols, and you have a few others that are now beginning to join in, including very, very recently, an auction house called Princeps. Typically, what happens in an auction house? A live auction, where the auctioneer is present in front of you, the works are being shown to you as they're being auctioned. Catalogs have been created, which means writers have been engaged. Works have been written about, especially the ones with high value, in some detail, etc. Then you have online auctions, which is a model where you sit on your laptop or on your phone and you can place your bid, which requires huge amounts of technology backup support. And the backup that an auction house requires, auctioneers, professionals to source art again, because where is the art going to come to for an auction house? Not everything that a client brings into an auction house may interest the auction house or its audience, its bidders very much. So people actually source good works of art. They know who owns great works of art. They're in touch with families, they're in touch with studios, etc., to make sure that acquisitions are happening. And acquisitions is a very skilled area to operate as well. Then you have the experts who will talk about the works of art, people who've done their courses in art history, people who will write about it, who will meet clients and talk about it. Shows are often taken for previews to other cities as well. And there again, you require these experts to come in and talk to clients. You need evaluators, people who will put a value. How? I know in the earlier session somebody was talking to Yamini about values, for example. how do you place value on a work of art? How do you decide this is for 1,000 rupees and not 100 rupees? Not 1,000 rupees, but 1,000,000 rupees. There's an engagement, there's a process, there's a checking, and you have to bring in a certain amount of transparency into this for the potential bidder to even be convinced that that value is a justified value. Otherwise, you could go in and laugh and say 1,000,000 rupees for something like this. What for? So there have to be extremely solid reasons why you're going to put in that kind of money into a work of art. Analysts who studying price points, etc., who help the evaluators in turn, gauging price points for a specific artist, for an artist in a certain period, painting in a certain medium. So works by an artist from the 60s may be much more expensive than works painted by the same artist in the 80s. Why would they be important, etc.? Was he working on a series that had a certain historical base, was well represented, very well covered by the media, or had people write about it, or was collected by museums, etc. So all those reasons power why price points are being established. Client management, to engage with potential bidders, to talk to them, to perhaps take advance bids, etc., or to liaise, etc., for the final auction itself. And of course, there is also the element in an auction house where, following the conclusion of the auction, if some works remain unsold, they could be offered for private sale, but auction houses in any case now also have departments that handle private sales for people who want to sell their works but don't want them to be shown publicly or put into a catalog, etc. Works of art will always require restoration. Climates like India are not very kind. You have heat, humidity, cold. Very often we don't know how to take care of works of art either. So very often you'll find fungus. We've not really cleaned surfaces well. We let works of art kind of deteriorate in quality without even knowing that there's a certain deterioration setting in, because we're seeing them on a regular basis. But works need restoration, and I think it's very important that the longevity of a work of art is extended, because when you own a work of art, you own what is also a part of a national heritage. A work of art that you buy doesn't belong only to you. It belongs to people. It belongs to a country. It belongs to something that's far more than the individual or the self. Therefore, restoration becomes very important. As yet, India has very few professional restorers, but there are courses that are on offer both in India and overseas. People work with mediums, try and understand how an artist has worked, etc. It's a very, very sensitive area, because you could end up ruining a work of art as well. Authentication, becoming increasingly important again in our country, and therefore you need people who will help you authenticate works of art, whether they're based out of galleries or whether they're individuals. Works that were sold 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody really cared. You just bought a work of art and put it on your walls or put it in your vaults and forgot about it. Today, when you want to value the work, you need a kind of history of the work. How did you get it? Where did you get it from? The entire element of provenance that comes in. How do you establish that it is not a fake work, that it is a real work, a genuine work? Therefore, that history becomes very important. Or experts who've studied artists and their styles and are equipped to tell you that, yes, this work is a genuine work by Raza, or we believe it may not be a work by Raza. People who therefore have been studying not only how artists work in a certain period of time, what mediums they were working on, where they were based, but also how they were signing in the 60s or how they were signing in the 70s or 80s. A Hussain work that might come to you signed in Telugu might surprise you, and you'll turn around and say, oh my God, this is not possible. But artists have signed in different ways at different points in time. So therefore, keeping even a history or a record of signatures and comparing them makes all that difference. And then, of course, there is that entire universe of services that works around how works of art are sold, kept, renovated, revitalized, etc. So you have framers, you have lighting experts, exhibition designers, architects among them. Framing has become a huge field today because a work of art will find itself looking very different in the manner that it is framed. You now want to put a work, fragile work, on paper, for example. You want to make sure that it has mount boards and paper support that is archival, so that there's no damage caused to the work of art over an extended period of time. You may choose to put in museum glass, for instance, to ensure that ultraviolet rays don't damage the work of art, but also the way you look at the work of art, there's no glare that spoils your viewing pleasure. You're able to see the depth, etc. So why is canvas, for example, not put behind glass? Because it breathes. So you need that kind of expert advice constantly and a whole support industry that takes care of a work of art that you acquire. Architects, display designers to tell you how a work of art is to be displayed, to make the most of it. Lighting displays to make sure that they're well put out together. There's both an art and a science into displaying works of art. Researchers, writers, you can look at a work of art, you can tell from your gut whether you like it or not. But how many of us in India actually even know how to look at a work of art? How many of us have gone to many galleries growing up? How many of us have visited museums on a constant basis? How many of us can even actually recognize the works of 5, 10, 15, 20 artists by just simply looking at it? We don't. We're not schooled to it. Our eyes are not trained because we haven't been taken by our parents on these visits. Our schools haven't taken us. Our colleges haven't taken us. And therefore, a sense of diffidence has come in. When I don't know something, I'm a little scared, so I won't go into a gallery because I might look like a fool when I go into that space, etc. So you need people to help you understand, and that's where researchers, writers, media, etc. become very, very important because they help defray some of that fear. If I don't understand it, I should be able to go up and ask. I should be able to go and say, I don't like this work of art, or I don't like this artist. And you're free not to like an artist, but it's equally important to understand the context, to learn about something. And I think our acceptance of a work of art will go up the moment we realize why an artist is working in a certain way. That's where researchers help. That's where writers help. It's a tough job. The difference between writers and curators, one works with words, the other works with works of art. One tells you about the work, the other looks at the work of art through a period of history, a sense of what works together. A curation is something where your ideas of how an exhibition is being held together are being brought into a certain place. Are you looking at a group of artists and therefore trying to show something? And therefore, are you going to look at a body of work from just the 60s or the 70s or the 80s? Or is the curator going to say, I'm only looking at paperworks, or I'm only looking at canvases, or I'm looking at sculptures? Is there a relationship? Are you trying to establish a relationship between work that was happening in the West and work that was happening in India at that period in time? So a curator is knowledgeable, has a history, art history background, most probably, has worked very intensively and closely with the world of art, but the curator's research is driven by the ultimate exhibition in mind. The universe, as I said, is huge. The kind of people you require designers, we've already said that, along with people who display works of art. somebody who will write the wall texts, and somebody who will create the wall text for you to stick on the walls. So there's an industry, there's entrepreneurship that's available. Caption writers, filmmakers, specialized filmmakers on the universe of art. Script writers, for those who are making those films. Documentary films on artists. We haven't seen very many documentary films. Doordarshan ran a series a very long while ago, which was brilliantly put together by a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker called Bikram Singh. It hasn't gone back to making documentaries on artists thereafter. So therefore, huge opportunities there. Huge opportunities actually for writers to actually advise people on how to look at art and buy art as well. So we're looking at entire areas. Artwork photography is a specialized field. A work on the wall needs to be represented in a book or a catalog or on an invitation and must be a true representation. How you photograph that, how you color correct it, how you print it is very, very difficult. There are specialized printers who work only on art books as opposed to any illustrated book or coffee table book. The universe of private museums. Museums, what do they require? Museologists, somebody with the requisite study degrees, ongoing courses, directors, curators, writers, researchers, educationists, and the entire universe of administration and logistics all over again. India has, of course, a very poor history in terms of private museums. It had a very rich history in terms of government museums, but many of them over a period of time, because of a lack of funds, etc., are finding that they're not really able to do everything that a museum ought to be doing. But efforts like this, we hope, will increase the kind of spaces where people like us who enjoy looking at art, studying art, understanding art, can go visit and share with collections of people. So private museums, like galleries, like other museums, again require that entire universe comes together of people to run the show, people to talk about the works, to put together books, to put together exhibitions, to put together contexts. Just to share, these are images from the Kiranada Museum. That's a work by Subodh Gupta on the left. This is the Piramal Art Foundation, the Piramal Museum of Art in Mumbai. Where do you see art? Other places? Commerce in art, enjoying art, enjoying it without the element of commerce associated with it. These and various other models exist. A biennale happens every 2 years, essentially a non-commercial show, unlike an art fair. These are images, of course, of the Kochi Biennale, which has now become very well known in India. And with it, and therefore these are the interesting opportunities that come one's way. What started as the Biennale, which its own universe of somebody actually looking at and interacting with artists around the world to bring in and put into a context, particularly in India, look for spaces, create those opportunities and create a platform and a dialogue. What has happened is that the Biennale has given a huge thrust to tourism in Kerala. People now are flying in from around the world, and the people who are coming in are not necessarily people only associated with the world of art. They are people who travel, who come on a holiday, etc., and say, oh, there's an activity happening there. It's pretty much like going to Goa and saying, oh, there's a music festival on, we'll attend it. There's a Biennale on, we'd go and look at the art. That's a fabulous reason to travel, etc., etc. So suddenly, the universe explodes to far, far more than just being contained even within this very vibrant sector. Again, at the Biennale, I think this was at the first Kochi Biennale. Art fairs, massive, massive. We all go and attend, these huge exhibitions, the India International Art Fair in Delhi, various product fairs that happen, garment fairs that happen, leather fairs that happen, etc., depending areas of professional interest, etc. An art fair, similarly, is a massive space of commerce where galleries come together, artists come together, countries come together, dialogues happen, art is seen, and the opportunities around it are tremendous because you're able to see works by hundreds and thousands of artists in the same space, understand what is happening in different countries, what other galleries are showing. So suddenly your learning grows exponentially if you're able to spend time and organize your time well. Art fairs usually also have seminars that are part of such events. There are new gallery launches, openings by artists, etc., etc. So there's a huge amount that you pack in over a short period of 3, 4, 5 days. And once again, look at the kind of people, manpower, strength in the art world that you will require to pull off something like this. Unlike a whole lot of other things, and I'm not belittling other products, etc., art requires extremely sensitive handling. So the kind of logistics that are called for in something like this are humongous. The environment, again, needs to be slightly more, let's say, evolved for art to be shown the way it needs to be shown. The right kind of lighting, the right atmosphere, the right mood, the right spaces, and everything else that comes with an art fair. Travel, commuting, food. Huge amounts of opportunities all over again. I mean, online selling, art funds, someone putting together art funds, for example, insuring works of art, a specialized area again, people who will help you invest in art, storage of art, warehousing, vaults. So, I mean, you can throw out ideas literally by the hundreds. Somebody who will help you create an online platform. Somebody who will help you sell art overseas. Someone who will help you create talks. Someone like Diwan, who's helping us over here put this off. Co-relationship building with other luxury brands and, you know, being a part of those luxury platforms somewhere. Creating a specialized group of people who will offer their services to private individuals to hang art in your homes. Outreach, another very important part of the world of art. Education, reaching out to people, whether the privileged or the underprivileged, reaching out to government, sensitizing people, sensitizing bureaucrats, and of course, reaching out to people with specialized, special abilities. And we were happy to have a group like that. Abhas, our program at DAG, where we bring in our experts to help you understand how to look at a world of art. For someone who's sight impaired, for someone who's blind, to be able to understand the world of an artist must be a very, very magical thing indeed. So that is something that we're able to do, but again, we find that there's a huge opportunity over here. There are schools, there are museums, there are galleries, there's everyone who needs to engage, students who need to be brought into spaces like this, teachers to be sent to schools to train children, or to explain or sensitize children about art. So again, part of DAG's outreach program. And this happens across all our galleries, for instance, and as a part of all our shows, wherever they travel. Writing art books for children. The opportunities that exist for entrepreneurs, you know, creating, tying up with artists, selling serigraphs, setting up museum shops, creating merchandise around artists' works, etc., creating and curating events about them, selling online. In terms of the media itself, both training the media and the media being brought in on the other hand. We need far more media to be actually talking about art. The space for art writing in newspapers and magazines has been shrinking. The space for the lifestyle of artists, on the other hand, may have been increasing, etc. But what we're looking for is people who can actually write about art, convince their editors about the need for more space in journals, etc., to fight for that, to have specialized photographers who will work with them once again, to actually work with design teams in magazines, etc., so that those design teams, when they're looking for opportunities for illustrations, etc., look for works by artists to represent it, no matter what the subject they're talking about. And of course, in terms of the backroom logistics, the non-glamorous part of the art world, shipping, packing, crating, security, etc. Can you imagine moving huge amounts of installations, very large? Contemporary art is creating massive, massive installations. Specialized companies now are based and coming out of Southeast Asia. Korea is a huge example, for instance, where they've created specialized shippers and logistics teams to handle art from around the world. The Netherlands is another country which has these specialized teams to handle very large works, etc. Storage of works, shipping of works, packing of works, which means that teams are actually reporting on the work when they receive it. Before packing it, they may take photographs so that the client cannot say later, oh, there's a crack in the work, there's flaking in the work, there's damage to the work, etc. So it's not simply putting it in bubble wrap, putting it into a crate and shipping it off. There's a huge amount of responsibility that goes with a work of art that may cost a few million rupees or a few $1 million. Constant source that you're looking for. Certainly organizations like ours, we employ people who will research aspects, will research photographs, will look for archival material so that it can be accessed and brought in to be part of our books and publications, etc. Libraries, a huge part again. France has just opened, I think, the world's first only fine art library, and it's apparently the largest library in the world. People who do specialized museum walks take you around the world. I know lots of people who package special visits where you will be taken on off hours, for example, to the Louvre or to the Tate, so that you're not a part of the general public in the public hours. So spaces are open specially for you. Or meetings are set up with artists or with curators, etc., so that sharing becomes a very important part of the way you travel and holiday. So art fairs themselves bring in a lot of very specialized groups, whether from museums or from travel groups that have an interest in art. This is a museum display again a part of KNMA, and those are works by Ghulam Sheikh. Art education. We see a huge opportunity for art teachers. There was a time when a lot of artists were also teachers. That break now means that you have space for far more people with a certain background, a certain sensitivity and knowledge to come in and occupy places in schools and colleges, etc., to write books, to create curricula for educational institutions. Specialized PR firms, as important as education. Law. How does somebody who's putting a check for $400 million on the table know that the work of art that he or she is buying is a real work of art? Who does that assessment? Yes, evaluators come in, etc. But finally, you need the legal profession to safeguard you. When you're putting in that $400 million or $4 million, you need to ensure that the work of art that you're buying is not being replaced by another work of art somewhere. that it doesn't disappear in between? How do you take charge of that work of art somewhere? Who monitors all the other invigilators, the evaluators, the security companies, etc., etc.? So legal firms specialize in art as well. They also specialize in things like copyright, intellectual property rights, etc. So again, arguably, so that all of you know, this work that we see of Hussein, for example, that is behind us, the artist may have sold the work to you, you may have sold it to us, we may have hung it on the wall, but the right to use an image of the work and merchandise it, use it for merchandise or to sell it does not rest with us even though we bought the work itself. So ownership of the work of art does not mean that you own the right to the image as well. Increasingly, therefore, lawyers are helping you buy the right to the image when you buy a work of art as well. So these are all part of a new universe that is developing and evolving and requires a growing network of professionals to support it. Artists themselves, they require a huge amount of assistance. They need people, if they're working with sculptors, etc., someone who helps forge things. They need foundries. They need their assistants to work with them, somebody who manages their inventories, manages their shipping. Many artists work with assistants, whether they're printmakers, sculptors, etc., or they're working on very large installations. They will require a battery of people they can work with. And finally, archiving itself. A work of art may have been purchased by you, but there's an entire archive that supports information behind that work of art. Who was the artist? Where was the work shown? Which exhibition was it shown in? Are there any written documents? Are there any scribbles? Are there any notes to tell you when it was sold, how much it was sold for? Are there sketchbooks with the same work that have been represented, etc., etc.? So that archive actually helps the entire support system understand whether it's evaluators, whether it's researchers, whether it's writers, whether it's buyers, sales teams, etc., to understand and lend greater value to a work of art or to a series of work of art or an artist's studio itself. So that, I think, kind of sums up the massive, 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 massive opportunities that exist for anyone with an interest in art. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, if any.
Coming back to the point, I personally find something that in the art world today, and when you are talking millions, you're talking about the artworks in millions of dollars, and here we have a large amount of audience who still are thinking of hundreds and thousands. Now there is some disconnect like this. We see in our industry, we have the large conglomerates, we have the large international companies, and here we have a very huge, what we call the micro and small industry. What I see is some kind of analogy process that we have an establishment where a huge chamber of innovators, R&D, a large number of the companies, and we have a very minuscule marketing department. It is not possible because these people are there working in their workshops, in their studios, and churning out the art. But the marketing for them is absolutely minuscule, and only hope I see this is a digital disruption. Instead of going from the pardon, instead of living in the old age of galleries and collectors and auctions, second stage, I think the need, what I can say, is to give a venue for being in this passion of art for these large numbers. Just to elaborate one more point, was this that when I was traveling around the world, I happened to travel in Ontario and visiting friends' house. His wife happened to be an art collector. And they had built a beautiful home, a lake of garden, which was like a feeling of museum. So I said to them, the house would be different, not like the vast one, but it would be different. Now, the artwork would have been a collector's outcome, but I'm sure the walls would still look beautiful if the work was not having a brand on it. The walls are walls, the artwork is art. That gave me inspiration. When we built our home, I gave the brief to the architect that if we want a home where there should be a place for us, there should be a place for work. It was different. We had our own internal listing. We will not give this space for whatever. But anyway, we created a home, and I find it very satisfying. That it may not be the best home, but it certainly is different. Then I did recently the short film where a flat which we are taking in time. And again the same thing. And I had in my mind that the interior designer had to work with the art. So we have got a flat of about 1,800 in which we have got for 10 12 art. So it looks like that, yeah, but it gives me a different feel. It's a different feel. Coming back to my point now, what I'm trying to drive home is I don't see that kind of a connect which is required by the artwork and the interior designers and the architects.
Okay, I'm going to take it from here because I think it's going on for very long. I totally endorse what you're saying, and I think this is what I was trying to represent here as well, that we need more people to create these platforms, more opportunities, more entrepreneurship. Definitely architects need to be sensitized, designers need to be sensitized, more people. You had the experience of traveling out and looking at, going into museums, etc. Not very many people do that. So a lot of it has to come from inside you, but a whole universe has to be created. And it's not about value of work. When we're talking about value of work, I'm talking about the context of shipping, etc., and therefore what needs to go into developing something that ensures its security or its insurance value, etc. But every work of art, one, is important. Two, every model will be a part of our larger universe. You cannot simply say that art will be sold online, etc., because we also have a history going back 5,000 years of works of art that have been created. Works and values also increase as things get older, etc. People want to touch, feel, see, understand. They will simply not pick up something if it's online without knowing what it is, without the endorsements that are required, without seeing something physically for themselves. But there's room for every kind of technological intervention, and that is going to continue to happen. Online selling is already happening in India, around the world. Online auctions are already happening. Technology will help you move on to your mobile phone, etc. Amateur painters, artists, etc. will definitely sell from these venues. But there are people who need to create these technology platforms. There are more entrepreneurs who need to come in, who need to create these opportunities, etc. And that's where I think that's what I've been talking about, that instead of being a very confined small segment of our society, the world of art actually allows huge opportunities in careers as well as entrepreneurship.